we've used the wrist as the primary point of motion for our stroke. Today, I'm going to talk about the other joints in our arm and how they can be manipulated to alter the stroke. I'll start with the least commonly used arm joint in percussion playing, the shoulder. This joint is the largest and most cumbersome joint that can be used to move the stick. I generally use the shoulder joint when playing the loudest of loud notes on instruments like the concert bass drum or the timpani. For general playing purposes, we will not use the shoulder when striking the snare drum. Sometimes an added visual effect will require the use of the shoulder, but usually only in performance at advanced levels outside of the scope of our discussion here today. Moving down the arm, the next joint we encounter is the elbow. The elbow is used regularly in snare drum performance, usually to aid in the fluidity of our motion. Let me demonstrate with an exercise from the last lesson, 4.5. As I perform each paradiddle, notice how I use a bend in the elbow to float the stick. This allows the stick to move with constant motion while playing, rather than repeatedly starting and stopping with a jerky motion. For our purposes today, I want you to remember that the elbow can aid in the smoothness of striking the snare drum when used in addition to the wrist, not in place of it. All of our talk about stroke so far has focused on the next joint, the wrist. Continue to focus on the idea that the motion of the wrist initiates the movement of the stick. When we add other joints into the equation, the motion of the wrist rarely is fully eliminated. The fingers are used primarily in situations where speed is necessary. Because of the fingers' relatively small size and the dexterity that they offer, our fingers allow us to move the sticks noticeably quicker than with the wrists alone. This speed does come at a cost of volume and endurance. You will find that it is difficult to play very loud for any length of time when primarily moving the stick with the fingers. Now, each of these joints can be combined in the execution of a single stroke to varying degrees. Let me demonstrate. Here's a stroke played with only wrist motion. Here's a stroke played with only elbow motion. And here's a stroke played with only finger motion. Each of these strokes has its place, but almost all strokes that we play on the snare drum will use a combination of finger, wrist, and elbow motion. Combining the motions of these joints will take some practice. Don't start by having your students play combination strokes. Allow them to develop a basic understanding of the wrist stroke before moving on to the elbow and the finger strokes. Today we will take some time to look a little more in depth at the finger stroke. The most important thing to remember when considering the finger stroke is the looseness of the grip required to execute it. If the stick is clenched in the hand, the fingers will have no room to move the stick. We must maintain that wiggle room that we talked about all the way back at the beginning of the course. When the stick can wiggle, the fingers are able to pull the stick into the hand, moving the stick downwards. After the stick strikes the drum, the fingers must relax to allow the stick to rebound back up, preparing us for the next stroke. Watch me execute a few strokes by moving only the fingers, and then try on your own a few times. While the finger stroke by itself will be useful every once in a while, you'll find that this stroke is most effective when combined with the wrist motion that we've been practicing already. Here's a stroke that combines 50% wrist with 50% finger. See how the joints in the arm work together to move the stick? This is the next step forward on your path towards more complete control of the sticks. Beginning practice of the combined finger and wrist stroke allows us to approach a new skill, the double stroke roll. The double stroke roll is one of the pillars of percussion playing, and it's a skill that requires great finesse and practice. Don't expect to master this in a day or two. It'll probably take weeks or even months for you to be confident enough in your role to teach it effectively to young students. It is a comparable process to learning double tonguing on a brass instrument, or spiccato bowings on a string instrument, or the altissimo register on a woodwind. Each is a specific skill that requires much work, but will result in a large expansion of musical possibilities. Before we get into the actual technique, let's talk about a few terms first. First is the word roll. A roll is a continuous series of sounds played with an alternating sticking and without rhythmic interruption. The Percussive Arts Society defines 4 types of rolls in their publication of 40 Percussive Arts Society International Drum Rudiments. The single stroke roll, the double stroke roll, the triple stroke roll, and the multiple bounce roll are all listed. We've already learned the single stroke roll, which is a series of alternating single strokes. The double stroke roll and the triple stroke roll are series of alternating double and triple strokes, respectively. Lastly, the multiple bounce roll is a series of alternating, you guessed it, multiple bounce strokes. Today we will begin practice of the double stroke roll by performing a solitary double stroke with each hand. When these strokes are performed as a continuous series of sounds without rhythmic interruption, we will arrive at the double stroke roll. The double stroke, also known as a double or a diddle, is commonly performed as a single wrist motion that allows the stick to strike the drum twice, creating 2 sounds. We achieve the doubling of the sound by employing the fingers and the natural rebound of the stick. Doubles must be performed in different ways for different musical circumstances. Some situations will require a significant amount of space between the 2 sounds of a double, and some situations will require that the 2 notes of a double be almost indistinguishable from one another. To conceptualize these differences in placement, I use a scale that I call the open-closed scale. Doubles that occur towards the open end of the scale are doubles where there's a wide space between the 2 sounds. Doubles that sound closer together would be placed towards the closed end of the scale. Take a listen to a few doubles I'd consider very open. Now, here are a few doubles that fall towards the closed end of the scale. Understanding this open-closed concept will be critical as we begin to learn how to manipulate the stick to create the precision that is required for any musical scenario. Because of the great variance of speed required for double strokes, 3 distinct techniques are commonly utilized. In order of their placement on the open-close scale, the 3 techniques are wrist-wrist, drop, squeeze, and bounce. Notice on the chart that I've overlapped the ranges of these 3 techniques. This is precisely how they're used in real situations. Just as with the finger-wrist combination stroke I mentioned earlier, these techniques can be combined to create smooth doubles throughout the open-close scale. We will begin practicing each of these 3 techniques separately, but as you feel comfortable with each, begin utilizing them in combination to create the motion needed for the required situation. We have already been performing doubles that fall on the open end of the open-close scale. Look back at exercises 2.5 and 2.6. Both of those exercises work to develop the double stroke. So far, to perform these exercises, we've been employing only the wrist. This is the best way to build consistent doubles towards the open end of the open-close scale. As you may have discovered already, it's difficult to perform these exercises quickly because of the fast motion required in the wrist. Here is where we begin to utilize the drop squeeze technique. Drop squeeze is executed exactly as it sounds. Drop the stick, then squeeze the fingers. you will see that the wrist only bends downward once, and the fingers create the second sound. Remember, it is imperative that the stick be held loosely or the finger stroke will not be possible. The drop squeeze technique takes a great sense of feel and timing to execute and is the most difficult part of building a working double stroke. Exercise 5.1 is a great place to start developing this technique. Here it is. At the furthest reach of the open-close scale, the drop squeeze technique is no longer possible. Sounds are required so close together that using two motions, wrist and fingers, is not feasible. Here, we move to our final double stroke technique, the bounce. The simplest of these three techniques discussed, the bounce double stroke is performed by adding slight pressure to the stick with the pointer finger and the thumb at the fulcrum. This allows the stick to rebound off of the drum and quickly be returned without a second hand motion. The more you squeeze the stick, the more closed the double becomes. Practice this bounced double stroke by throwing the stick downward, letting it strike twice, and then lifting. Experiment with the pressure between your index finger and thumb to manipulate how open or closed the double is. Here are some bounce doubles with very loose pressure. And here are some bounce doubles with moderate pressure added. To review, it's important to be able to execute double strokes at any speed from very open to very closed. To perform these strokes, we employ three techniques that overlap significantly on the open-close scale. The most open doubles require 2 consecutive wrist strokes. As we begin to move towards doubles that are more closed, we utilize the drop squeeze technique. This technique allows us to close the space between the two sounds significantly. To achieve smooth doubles at the extreme closed end of the scale, we utilize the double bounce, which is a stroke that mostly eliminates the fingers and relies on the natural rebound of the drum. Practice each of these three techniques separately. Exercise 5.2 works with shorter double stroke rolls. Exercise 5.3 starts to develop the double one hand at a time. Use exercises 5.4 and 5.5 to develop the double stroke roll. Exercise 5.6 will challenge you to explore all combinations of doubles used over a triplet rhythmic bass. One note about these exercises. A single slash on a note stem is traditionally used as shorthand for a double. Confusion comes when doubles are mixed with multiple bounces. We haven't talked about the multiple bounce roll yet, so I'll address that confusion in a later lesson. As you begin to feel comfortable with each of these exercises, alter the tempos to explore how the double stroke techniques combine to allow you to execute clear sounds in any musical situation. Don't forget to work through the reading studies for Lesson 5 as well. Good luck!